There are moments in life when a sudden awareness dawns upon you. You wake up and realize that much of what you call your life might not actually belong to you. The choices you have made, the beliefs that guide you, and even the longings that drive you forward may have been planted in you by family, culture, or society. It is unsettling to admit that much of your existence may have been quietly shaped by invisible forces that you never questioned. In that instant, the world looks different. What you thought of as your essence may only be a mask constructed from expectations. Think of your daily identity for a moment. How much of it truly reflects your authentic being, and how much of it is simply a carefully crafted facade designed to secure approval? You carry a name, a role, a list of responsibilities, and you perform them with consistency. Yet deep inside, there might be a whisper asking whether this is who you truly are. Most people live as if they are on a stage, repeating lines written long before they were born, not realizing that the play itself can be rewritten. This tension between the outer mask and the inner essence is at the heart of Carl Jung's teachings. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and pioneer of depth psychology, believed that life does not genuinely begin until you find yourself. This phrase does not refer to superficial self-awareness. It points instead to a profound transformation where the unconscious is brought into dialogue with the conscious mind. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming one's truest, most complete self. He argued that most people never embark on this journey, remaining trapped within the identities society has assigned to them. They obey unwritten scripts, pursue approval, and mistake validation for fulfillment, all the while ignoring the unease that lingers beneath. From the moment we enter the world, we are given roles to play. We are taught what is acceptable, rewarded for certain behaviors, and punished for others. Over time, we learn to suppress the parts of ourselves that do not fit the mold. A child who cries too easily is told to be strong. A dreamer is urged to be realistic. Someone with deep sensitivity may be told to hide it away. Slowly, layers of the true self are buried under rules and judgments until only a polished mask remains. Jung named this mask the persona. It allows us to function within society, but it also distances us from the depth of our being. Opposite the persona lies the shadow. If the persona is the face we show to the world, the shadow is everything we conceal: our fears, our forbidden desires, our unspoken wounds, and even strengths that we have not dared to embrace. Jung insisted that the shadow does not vanish simply because we refuse to see it. Instead, it influences us from below the surface. It emerges in our projections, our emotional triggers, and the people we dislike without explanation. What disturbs us in others often reflects what we have hidden within ourselves. Yet Jung's insight was not that the shadow is a curse, but that it is a key. Psychological growth, he believed, is not achieved by eliminating the shadow, but by integrating it. When you dare to look into the depths of your hidden self and acknowledge what you have denied, you unlock power, authenticity, and freedom. The parts of you that you once treated as enemies become allies in the journey toward wholeness. This is not an easy process, but it is the foundation of a life that truly belongs to you. Consider how often people live convinced they already know who they are. They define themselves by labels, their profession, their nationality, their past. But Jung argued that these identities are only fragments of a far greater reality. Beneath them lies a vast unconscious world, filled with forgotten memories, suppressed emotions, and unrealized potential. The self you cling to might only be a surface expression, while deeper dimensions wait in silence. To find yourself is to rediscover these hidden realms, not to invent a new identity, but to uncover what has always been there. This process begins with awareness. When you notice patterns in your life that repeat, when you feel drawn to people or situations that unsettle you, when you sense that something essential is missing, you are glimpsing the unconscious at work. Those persistent feelings of restlessness, those moments of disproportionate reaction, and those dreams that stir emotions you cannot explain. These are signals. They point to the reality that you are more than the mask you wear. Life, Jung believed, truly begins when you stop running from these signals and start listening to them. When you begin to explore what prevents people from finding themselves, you quickly realize that most of it is conditioning. From childhood, individuals are given not only names, but also identities. Parents, teachers, and cultural institutions hand out rules about what is acceptable and what is not. You are praised for certain behaviors and shamed for others. Slowly, without noticing, you learn that some parts of you are welcomed, while others must be hidden. This selective acceptance creates division inside the self. The authentic voice is silenced, while the voice of the persona grows louder. Think back to moments of your early life. Perhaps you laughed too freely and were told you were being silly. Perhaps you cried openly and were told that tears were signs of weakness. Perhaps your creativity was dismissed as unrealistic, or your sensitivity was labeled as fragile. Each of these messages became an instruction, a signal to push a part of yourself into the shadows. What you displayed on the surface was rewarded, while what you hid away was ignored or punished. Over years, this process built a mask so convincing that you may have forgotten it was only a mask. The danger of this adaptation is that you begin to believe the mask is who you are. You identify with it so strongly that the deeper self becomes distant and unfamiliar. Yet beneath the mask, the shadow grows restless. The shadow is not only the dark impulses that frighten you, but also the lost potential you never allowed yourself to claim. The courage you buried under obedience, the creativity you suppressed under practicality, the tenderness you hid under fear of rejection. All of these belong to the shadow. They are not gone. They wait for recognition. Jung warned that when the shadow is ignored, it does not disappear. Instead, it influences thoughts and actions indirectly. It leaks into life as sudden anger, envy, self-sabotage, or unexplained dislike for others. These reactions are not random. They are clues pointing back to your hidden self. For example, when someone's behavior deeply irritates you without clear reason, it may be because that same trait exists within you, but remains unacknowledged. This is projection, a mechanism through which the unconscious attempts to reveal what you have denied. The integration of the shadow is not comfortable, but it is transformative. To face what you have hidden requires honesty and courage. It asks you to look at your fears, your wounds, and even the parts of you that contradict the image you want others to see. However, when you welcome these aspects instead of rejecting them, they lose their destructive power. The qualities that once controlled you from the dark become sources of strength and authenticity. You begin to see yourself not as a divided being, but as a whole one. Most people avoid this work because it feels easier to remain distracted. Silence and solitude are often filled with discomfort, so they turn to endless activity, entertainment, or social approval to avoid facing the deeper questions. Yet these distractions cannot erase the unconscious. The parts of yourself that you ignore find expression anyway. They show up in anxiety, in patterns of failure, in relationships that repeat the same disappointments. Until you turn inward, these cycles continue. Finding yourself begins with the recognition that your inner unrest is not an accident. It is the voice of your deeper self, calling you to integration. Jung described this as individuation, the process of becoming whole by reconciling the conscious with the unconscious, the light with the shadow. Individuation is not about becoming someone new, but about recovering the fullness of who you already are. It is the movement away from a life of borrowed roles into a life that reflects your true essence. In this sense, the journey to find yourself is not a luxury. It is a necessity for a meaningful life. When you begin to integrate your hidden aspects, you discover freedom. You are no longer controlled by the need for approval or trapped by old wounds. Instead, You live from a place of authenticity. The outer world does not dictate your sense of worth. You stand as an individual rooted in your own depths, able to face both light and darkness without fear. This is the threshold where real life begins. When individuals claim that they already know who they are, they often point to their external identities. They mention their name, their profession, their nationality, or their family history. These labels provide structure, but they do not capture the full truth. Jung believed that what most people call the self is only a fraction of something much larger. Beneath the surface identity lies a vast and intricate unconscious world filled with forgotten experiences, silenced emotions, and unexpressed creativity. To stop at surface labels is to mistake a fragment for the whole. The unconscious speaks in ways that are subtle but persistent. It appears in dreams, in the symbols that arise unexpectedly, and in the emotions that surface without explanation. When a person feels a longing, they cannot name or experiences restlessness even in moments of success. This is the unconscious trying to be heard. Such experiences are invitations to look deeper. They suggest that the life being lived does not fully reflect the richness of the inner world. Jung urged people to pay attention to these signals, for they often reveal truths that the conscious mind resists. One of the clearest examples of the unconscious at work is the fear of rejection. Many people build their lives around avoiding disapproval. They seek validation, silence their opinions, or reshape themselves to fit expectations. On the surface, this appears as politeness or adaptability, but beneath it lies an old wound. Perhaps in childhood, there was a moment when they felt unseen or unworthy, and the pain of that memory became buried. The fear of rejection is not simply about others. It is a reflection of an unhealed part of the self. Until this wound is acknowledged, it shapes choices from the background. When someone dares to confront such fears, the power they hold diminishes. The act of facing what has been hidden breaks its control. Imagine speaking your truth without the constant dread of judgment, or making decisions based on inner conviction rather than external approval. This is not about defiance for its own sake. It is about reclaiming the freedom to live authentically. Jung believed that the integration of shadow aspects transforms limitations into strengths. A fear that once kept you silent may become the very force that gives you courage to stand firm. Dreams, according to Jung, are among the most powerful tools for accessing the unconscious. They are not random sequences of images, but symbolic messages from deeper layers of the psyche. In dreams, hidden conflicts, unacknowledged desires, and potential solutions often reveal themselves. To reflect on dreams is to listen to the self that exists beyond conscious awareness. Creative expression serves a similar role. Art, writing, or music allow the unconscious to emerge in ways the rational mind cannot fully control, giving voice to the parts of the self that words alone cannot capture. The process of uncovering the unconscious requires patience and openness. It is tempting to dismiss strange emotions or unusual images as irrelevant, but these are often the doorways to self-discovery. Jung encouraged curiosity rather than fear. By asking why a particular image keeps returning, or why certain people evoke such strong reactions, you begin to trace the patterns of the unconscious. These patterns illuminate the hidden architecture of your psyche, showing how your inner world influences your outer reality. It is important to understand that integration does not mean erasing conflict. Wholeness is not the absence of struggle, but the ability to hold light and darkness together without denial. When you embrace both sides of yourself, you step beyond the need to appear flawless. You accept vulnerability alongside strength, compassion alongside firmness, creativity alongside discipline. This acceptance creates authenticity, and authenticity becomes the foundation of real connection with others. Thus, the path of individuation is not about becoming extraordinary in the eyes of society. It is about becoming whole in the eyes of yourself. It is about stepping into alignment with the totality of your being, and no longer living as a stranger to your own depths. When this happens, the endless search for external approval fades, and what emerges instead is a quiet, unshakable sense of belonging to your own life. The unconscious does not only hold personal memories and repressed desires. It also contains patterns that are far older than any individual life. Jung called these patterns archetypes. Archetypes are universal images and themes that appear in myths, religions, literature, and dreams across all cultures and eras. They represent fundamental human experiences, such as the hero's journey, the nurturing mother, the wise guide, or the destructive shadow. These figures are not external characters, but inner forces that shape how we live and how we understand the world. Consider the archetype of the hero. Within every person, there is a part that longs for purpose, that feels called to rise above obstacles and strive for growth. The hero seeks transformation, strength, and meaning. Yet the hero is never alone. The hero's story always involves an encounter with the shadow, represented in myths as monsters, enemies, or dark trials. This confrontation symbolizes the inner battle each person faces when confronting fears, doubts, and the hidden aspects of the self. Without this struggle, there is no growth. The shadow is not a roadblock, but a necessary step toward wholeness. In daily life, this archetypal battle reveals itself when you sense the possibility of change, but hesitate to step forward. The opportunity to grow presents itself, yet fear, doubt, or self-sabotage holds you back. This is the hero and the shadow meeting within you. The mistake many make is trying to silence or deny the shadow. They think strength means suppression. Jung argued instead that true transformation happens when the shadow is understood and integrated. To meet your fear is to uncover its lessons. To meet your doubt is to discover the humility and reflection hidden within it. Another profound archetype is the anima and animus. Jung believed that within every man lies an inner feminine aspect, the anima, and within every woman lies an inner masculine aspect, the animus. These are not about gender in the physical sense, but about the energies that balance each human being. The anima embodies qualities such as intuition, sensitivity, creativity, and emotional depth. The animus embodies logic, structure, discipline, and assertiveness. To reject either force is to create imbalance. To integrate them is to find wholeness. Imagine a man who denies his anima. He may struggle to express emotions, seeing vulnerability as weakness. Over time, he might feel disconnected from intimacy or overwhelmed by feelings he cannot name. Or consider a woman who denies her animus. She may hesitate to assert herself, fearing judgment when she takes control of her life. These rejections create inner conflict, but when these aspects are embraced, they become sources of immense strength. Emotional depth and assertive clarity can coexist, creating a balanced self capable of navigating life with authenticity. The archetypes remind us that we are not isolated beings, but part of a larger story of humanity. Myths and legends endure because they mirror the movements of our own inner world. When you read about a hero facing a dragon, you are also reading about the struggle within yourself. When you encounter the wise mentor in a story, you are being reminded of the guiding voice that lives in your unconscious. These images connect us not only to our own depths, but also to the collective human experience. Individuation, therefore, is not only a personal journey, but also a universal one. As you integrate the archetypes within yourself, you are participating in a process that has unfolded through countless generations. The struggles of heroes, the wisdom of mentors, the presence of shadows, and the tension between masculine and feminine energies all exist within you. To recognize them is to discover that your life is both deeply personal and profoundly universal at the same time. When you begin to work with archetypes consciously, you gain new clarity about your experiences. Challenges no longer appear as meaningless suffering, but as symbolic encounters meant to teach and transform. Relationships are no longer just social interactions, but opportunities to see your inner patterns reflected back to you. Each archetype that you meet within yourself becomes a step on the path of individuation. With every step, you move closer to the realization of wholeness, to a life that is not borrowed or imposed, but authentically yours. When you explore the archetypes within, you realize that they are not abstract theories, but living forces that influence your choices every day. They shape your relationships, your ambitions, and even the challenges you face. The hero pushes you to grow. The shadow tests your courage. The anima and animus guide your balance. And countless others, such as the wise elder or the innocent child, remind you of truths buried deep within. These forces are always active, whether or not you acknowledge them. To ignore them is to live unconsciously. To recognize them is to begin shaping your life with intention. Jung emphasized that wholeness comes from embracing all these aspects rather than favoring some and rejecting others. To deny the shadow because it frightens you, or to deny the anima or animus because it feels uncomfortable, is to remain incomplete. Wholeness demands the integration of opposites, the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine, the known and the mysterious. This does not mean that conflict disappears. Instead, it means you gain the strength to carry conflict without being torn apart by it. In that acceptance, you find authenticity. At the center of Jung's work is the concept of the self, which is different from the ego. The ego is the conscious identity, the voice that says, "This is who I am." The self, however, represents the totality of your being, both conscious and unconscious, both shadow and persona, both personal and universal. To live only from the ego is to see a fragment of the picture. To awaken to the self is to see the wholeness of who you truly are. Jung described this as a realization that feels both liberating and unsettling, for it shatters the illusion of a fixed identity. Think about the way most people cling to labels. They say, "I am this kind of person," or "I am not the type who does that." These statements create stability, but also limitation. They box the self into narrow definitions. Yet the truth is that identity is fluid. It evolves, adapts, and expands as you integrate more of yourself. The self cannot be confined to rigid categories. It is vast, dynamic, and connected to something larger than your individual story. To recognize this is to step beyond the prison of narrow self-concepts. The greatest obstacle to this recognition is the ego's desire for certainty. The ego resists change because it wants control. It builds walls to define who you are and who you are not. But these walls are illusions. They create separation from others, from the unconscious, and from the larger flow of life. When you mistake these walls for truth, you limit your own growth. Jung encouraged people to see the ego not as an enemy, but as a tool, a necessary part of life that must be balanced by the deeper wisdom of the self. One of the most powerful steps on this journey is learning to release attachment to rigid labels. When you stop identifying solely with your job, your past, or your social role, you create space for deeper truths to emerge. You begin to see yourself not as a single, unchanging being, but as an evolving consciousness. This recognition does not weaken you. Instead, it expands your possibilities. You are no longer bound by who you were yesterday. You are free to grow into who you are meant to become. Listening to the unconscious becomes essential in this process. Your dreams, instincts, and intuitions are not random or meaningless. They are messages from the self. They reveal what the ego cannot see. When you pay attention, patterns emerge. Synchronicities, sudden insights, and recurring images act as guideposts. These are not coincidences. They are signals from the deeper layers of your psyche, leading you toward wholeness. The more you listen, the more clearly the self reveals itself. Ultimately, individuation is not a final destination. It is an unfolding journey that lasts a lifetime. Each step uncovers new layers of truth. Each challenge presents a chance to integrate what was hidden, and each insight moves you closer to authenticity. Life begins in its truest sense when you walk this path consciously. You no longer live as a fragment shaped by conditioning, but as a whole, being aware of both light and shadow, guided not only by the ego, but by the vastness of the self. The realization that the self is larger than the ego can feel overwhelming at first. Many people resist it because it challenges the foundations on which they have built their lives. If you are not only your profession, your past, or the roles you play, then who are you? Jung would answer that you are not a single identity at all, but a living process, an evolving being whose depths reach far beyond the conscious mind. The self you identify with today is only one expression of a much greater whole that continues to unfold. This truth is unsettling, yet it is also liberating. The ego often clings to familiar stories, even painful ones, because they provide stability. A person might think, I am someone who always fails, or I am not capable of leadership, or I am defined by my childhood wounds. These narratives become prisons. They limit what the person can imagine for themselves, and they keep growth at a distance. Jung emphasized that these stories are not absolute truths, but temporary constructs of the mind. When you recognize them as constructs, you begin to loosen their hold. You understand that the self is not fixed, but fluid, capable of transformation. To move toward wholeness, one must learn to embrace the unknown. The unknown is where the unconscious reveals itself. Most people fear uncertainty, seeing it as a threat to security. Yet Jung argued that the unknown is not an enemy, but the very space where growth takes place. By stepping into uncertainty with curiosity rather than fear, you open yourself to transformation. It is in the unknown that you encounter new possibilities, fresh insights, and aspects of yourself you never knew existed. Growth does not happen in what is already familiar. It happens at the edge of mystery. Another key step in this journey is surrendering the need for rigid labels. Labels create the illusion of control, but prevent authentic self-discovery. When you say, I am this kind of person and not that kind, you block parts of yourself that may be waiting to be integrated. Jung encouraged individuals to release the grip of these definitions. To let go of fixed identities is not to lose yourself. It is to create the space for the deeper self to emerge. In this spaciousness, you discover that you are far more than any single label could ever express. Listening to the unconscious is also essential. The unconscious speaks to dreams, symbols, synchronicities, and intuitions. These are not meaningless fragments of imagination. They are the language of the self. By reflecting on dreams, noticing recurring patterns, or honoring the sudden insights that arise without explanation, you connect with the deeper layers of your being. Over time, this practice builds trust in your inner guidance. You begin to see that life is not random, but filled with meaningful patterns pointing you toward wholeness. Creative expression offers another way to integrate the unconscious. Through art, writing, music, or movement, you give form to what words alone cannot capture. The creative process bypasses the rigid control of the ego and allows the unconscious to emerge freely. Many people find that when they create without expectation, they discover images, emotions, and truths that reveal hidden aspects of themselves. Creative work becomes not just an artistic endeavor, but a spiritual practice, a dialogue with the self that brings healing and integration. This journey requires courage because it demands that you face not only the light, but also the shadow. You must be willing to confront the fears, wounds, and contradictions you have long avoided. Yet when you do, you discover that these are not weaknesses, but potential sources of wisdom. The fear of rejection may teach the value of authenticity. The experience of failure may reveal resilience. The shadow does not disappear, but once it is faced, it transforms into an ally. In this way, even pain becomes part of your growth. To live this path is to understand that finding yourself is not a one-time achievement, but a continuous unfolding. Every stage of life brings new aspects of the unconscious into awareness, new challenges to integrate, and new truths to embrace. Individuation is never complete, for the self is inexhaustible. But each step brings greater freedom, authenticity, and connection to the depth of your being. It is in walking this path that life begins in its truest form, not as a performance for others, but as an expression of who you really are. Throughout this journey, one truth becomes clearer. Most people live as strangers to themselves. They follow paths designed by others, cling to identities given to them, and suppress the voice that whispers from within. They believe that by meeting expectations, they will find happiness, yet the sense of emptiness persists. Jung insisted that this emptiness is not a flaw, but a signal. It is the soul calling for integration, reminding you that life cannot be fulfilled by surface identities alone. To ignore this call is to remain fragmented, but to follow it is to step into authenticity. Consider how often people distract themselves to avoid this inner voice. Work, entertainment, endless social interactions, or constant digital noise fill the silence. The reason is simple. Silence exposes the truth of the inner world. When you sit quietly with yourself, you feel the conflicts you have avoided, the fears you have denied, and the longings you have silenced. Distraction is easier, but it is also costly. It keeps you bound to cycles of dissatisfaction. Jung believed that true healing begins when you allow yourself to face what silence reveals. The unconscious, even when ignored, does not disappear. It continues to shape your choices, relationships, and emotions. You might notice patterns repeating in your life, similar disappointments, recurring conflicts, or the same mistakes resurfacing despite your efforts to change. These repetitions are not accidents. They are the unconscious trying to be acknowledged. Until you face the root, the pattern continues. This is why Jung emphasized that the unconscious is not merely hidden material. It is active and persistent, always seeking integration. A crucial step is learning to see struggles not as enemies, but as teachers. The parts of yourself you reject often contain the very lessons you need. Anxiety might reveal the importance of slowing down. Anger might point to boundaries that need to be honored. Envy might show you the desires you have been too afraid to pursue. When you meet these emotions with curiosity, rather than denial, they become guides. They lead you toward aspects of yourself that are waiting to be brought into the light. The same is true for relationships. Often, the people who trigger you the most reveal qualities you have not acknowledged within yourself. This is the dynamic of projection. When you find yourself irritated, jealous, or overly judgmental, it is worth asking whether the trait you dislike in another is something you have disowned in yourself. Such realizations are not comfortable, but they are powerful. They transform conflict into self-discovery. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to see your inner world reflected back at you. Integration is not about eliminating discomfort, but learning to walk with it. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means being able to acknowledge contradictions without denying them. You can be strong and vulnerable, disciplined and playful, logical and emotional. These are not opposites to be chosen between, but parts of a larger whole to be embraced. When you allow yourself to hold these tensions, you no longer need to pretend or perform. You live as a complete human being rather than a mask. This is why individuation is such a radical path. It asks you to shed illusions, to stop pretending, and to live as your authentic self. It does not promise an easy life, but it promises a real one. Instead of chasing validation, you create meaning from within. Instead of running from fear, you face it and discover freedom. Instead of hiding your shadow, you integrate it and find strength. Life, in this sense, begins not when you conform, but when you embrace your wholeness. The choice is always yours. You can continue living as a fragment, shaped by external voices and bound by fear, or you can begin the journey inward. The path of individuation is demanding, but it is also the only path that leads to genuine fulfillment. To take that path is to honor the deepest truth, that you are more than the mask you wear, more than the roles you play, and more than the stories you repeat. You are a vast, evolving being, and life truly begins when you find yourself. At the heart of Jung's vision lies a profound truth. The self you believe yourself to be is only a fragment of a much greater reality. Most people assume that identity is fixed, a stable personality moving through time. They cling to the idea that the ego defines the whole of who they are. Yet Jung, along with many mystics and philosophers, understood that the ego is only a surface structure. Beneath it lies the self vast, fluid, and interconnected with the deeper layers of human experience. To awaken to this truth is to realize that you are not limited to a single role, a single story, or a single lifetime of conditioning. This realization is both unsettling and liberating. It is unsettling because it dissolves the familiar sense of certainty. If you are not the fixed identity you thought you were, then the ground beneath you feels unstable. But it is liberating because it means you are not trapped by the labels and limitations you once believed. You are not only the product of your past. You are not confined by the voices that told you who to be. You are a being in constant evolution, capable of transformation at every stage of life. The fear of losing identity becomes the gateway to discovering your greater wholeness. The ego, however, resists this realization. It clings to boundaries, declaring, "This is who I am, and this is who I am not." It creates separation, defining you against the world and against others. While the ego has its role, it helps you function in society. It also becomes the greatest obstacle to self-discovery when it refuses to expand. To transcend this obstacle does not mean destroying the ego, but placing it in balance. The ego must learn to serve the self rather than dominate it. Only then can you step into your full potential. How do you move beyond the illusion of a fixed self? Jung suggested several practices. The first is embracing the unknown. Growth requires the willingness to step into mystery without fear. The second is releasing attachment to rigid labels. You are not just your profession, your background, or your past experiences. You are something far greater, beyond definition. The third is listening to the unconscious. Your dreams, instincts, and intuitions are not random. They are messages from the self, guiding you toward wholeness. And finally, there is surrender, the willingness to let go of control and allow the deeper truth of who you are to unfold naturally. This surrender does not mean passivity. It means learning to cooperate with life rather than fight against it. It means noticing the patterns, the synchronicities, and the signals that point you toward growth. It means trusting that the unconscious is not your enemy, but your greatest ally. When you align with this process, you discover that life itself becomes your teacher. Every challenge becomes a mirror. Every relationship becomes a lesson. Every moment becomes part of the unfolding of the self. In this way, the journey of individuation is endless. It does not lead to a final achievement where all is complete. Instead, it is a lifelong process of unfolding deeper and deeper layers of truth. Each stage of life brings new aspects of the unconscious into awareness. Each encounter with shadow, each integration of archetypes, each moment of surrender expands the wholeness of your being. Life is no longer about chasing external approval or clinging to old definitions. It becomes about living in alignment with the vast self that has always been within you. The greatest revelation of all is that you are never truly lost. The authentic self you have been seeking has always been present, waiting for recognition. The masks, the fears, and the illusions only obscured it. When you begin to strip these away, you realize that the essence of who you are was never absent. It was only hidden beneath the noise of conditioning. To remember this truth is to awaken to the life that is genuinely yours. The question that remains is simple, yet profound. Will you continue to live as a fragment, bound by fear and illusion, or will you step into the unknown and embrace the fullness of who you are? Jung believed that life does not truly begin until you find yourself. That journey is demanding, but it is also the most rewarding path a human being can walk. It offers not only freedom and authenticity, but also a deeper connection to humanity, to the collective unconscious, and to the great mystery of existence itself.